So then, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are very thankful you joined our podcast today. And Jens, we have, I think, a very interesting composer today.
You think it's a very interesting composer.
Let's see what you will think, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking today about this. Since we're starting this podcast, since the episode -00, I was waiting to do Weil.
You've been itching, I know.
I can say I am a Weil fan. I am absolutely because of his diversity.
Yeah,
His amazing diversity. I mean, he was living 50 years. He's the only composer I can remember because it's so easy from 1900 to 1950. It's very easy. In this period, he had so many different styles, from the song styles. Sometimes you hear modern music like Schoenberg in his early one-act operas, then up to the operetta, beautiful operetta, to the end of course of his Broadway hits, you know.
And I think maybe different people know different Kurt Weils for themselves. For years and years and years, the only thing I knew about Kurt Weill was this.
What was this? Okay. The Seven Deadly Sins, yeah.
And the theater songs, Mac the Knife with Lotelenia here.
Okay.
And I think I got this off of B&G Record Club when I was a student. And then I didn't get any Kurt Weill until Capriccio helped me out with all the Kurt Weill you recorded. You have this idea of who Kurt Weill is, and then it turns out to be so much more, I guess. So that's what you're here to.
I mean, the Capriccio edition started already in the mid of the 1980s. If you really have people they have no idea who this composer is, or I said, I never heard something from Kurt Weill, we are talking about this guy.
Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne und die trägt im Gesicht. Und McKees, der hat ein Messer, doch das Messer sieht man nicht. An dem schönen blauen Sonntag liegt ein toter Mann am Strand. Und ein Mensch geht um die Ecke, den man Messer nennt.
You will not hear any more in this podcast from the Three Penny Opera now, because we want to focus on the mostly unknown works by Kurt Weill.
Right, for me, that's everything except that song.
Okay. You hate it.
No, I don't hate it. I was just that was enough Weill for me when I was young, I guess, and I was like, okay, that's Weill, and I've heard it now. Thank you very much.
It's like Mozart's Kleine Nachtmusik. This is Mozart's finish.
I mean, it's like that.
Beethoven Fifth. This is okay. Beethoven finished, and Weill, the Moritat from Mackie Messer, finished. Okay.
Although probably if you know only the Beethoven Fifth of Beethoven, you know more about Beethoven than you would know about Weill if all you knew was Mac the Knife.
Yeah, of course. And that's why let's start now at the beginning. In 1922, Kurt Weill had the first commission to make a pantomime, ballet pantomime in Berlin, for a Berlin theater. And this time, his music sounds like this.
Mein Spielzeugvolk muss sein am Tage starr und stumm, als kenne es keine Böse. beschwöre leis und sacht auch allen Leben an. Das Starre dann sich regt, der Möbel sich bewegt, das Stund beim Tag der Braus lernt fröhlich von
It's not Schoenberg, but it is sort of a young man being under the impression of Schoenberg.
Yeah.
But Nyself it's for a pantomime, presumably it's for children, so you can't scare them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of singing for a pantomime. You would think a pantomime would be more quiet.
Yeah, this is only, I think they have 15 tracks or something, and there are 2 tracks for singing. But I just put it out because it's a nice, you can combine it now with Max the Knife. But this was the time that Schoenberg had not really influences already in 1922.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He wrote the first Beethoven piece around 1911,
Okay.
and I think by 22, surely Pierre Lunaire must have
Okay.
premiered in Berlin.
Okay.
And if you're a musician, if you study music, and if you're in the theater scene in Berlin, you would know about Schoenberg.
Okay.
It's impossible to imagine that he wouldn't have known him.
Okay, so we have a very young guy who want to who want to conquer the world. And as we had already, his big success was already in 1928. Then comes the work together with Bertolt Brecht.
So what was the big success in 28?
In 28, the Treibhausche with Three Penny.
Oh, okay.
All these Brecht things are a bit like social critics.
Yeah, that's kind of the while I think of sort of Hans Eisler. You like Eisler, me not as much, probably also because of my ignorance. But that's sort of what I always assumed all of the rest of Weill sounds like.
Yeah. No, he don't sound like always like Three Penny or whatever. As we can hear now, let's see what I have. One of his first one-act operas like Protagonist. And there are also one short, more comical opera. The Tsar has his photograph taken, or der Tsar lässt sich fotografieren. And if you remember now the beautiful song of the fairy, now we have this.
Der Zahn lässt sich fotografieren. Der Zahn lässt sich fotografieren. Der Zahn, der Zahn.
Well, I think this is Moses and Aaron.
Not quite, but yeah, some of that direction.
This is the time when Kurt Weill tried to revolutionize the world of opera. And the interesting thing is, later on comes the Three Penny Opera. I mean, just the same year. This is crazy. These different styles. These songs from the Three Penny Opera, and on the other hand, such a
Yeah, which is
such a choir.
serious,
Yeah.
modern, mystic kind of German opera.
Absolutely. Yeah, and his other big success then, of course, was Mahagoni Songspiel in this time.
That I was going to ask because that's the only other
Yeah.
Jacke that I know and that I've seen, and that's also from that time.
Mahagoni Songspiel, and later on, then in 1930, the opera. And of course, some people may know this song from Aufstieg und Fall der Stadt Mahagoni, Rise and Fall of the City of Mahagoni. Okay.
Oh, show us the way to the next whiskey bar.
Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why.
Well, we must find the next whiskey bar, for if we don't find the next whiskey bar,
I tell you we must die. I tell you we must die.
I tell you, I tell you, I tell you we must die. Oh, moon of Alabama, we now must say goodbye. We've lost our good old mama and must have
I think that's exactly why I stopped listening to Weil.
Okay.
No, it's a little bit like he's a victim of his own success. The things that most people know are the things that I like least about him. It's like the Beatles. The three greatest hits of the Beatles are exactly the three songs I can't stand.
Okay.
And then I never listened to the rest because I was not of the right age. It wasn't being played by people around me.
Yeah.
And that sort of, and I've seen the opera, and that never tickled me. And it's probably the unknown stuff that I would enjoy much more.
It's more of the unknown stuff, but it's also this kind of socialism, critical.
Yes, the music hasn't aged that well.
But it can be totally other because he worked together with Georg Kaiser. And Georg Kaiser was also like Brecht, but in a totally other different way. How to say, socializing, criticizing author. And with him, he made some pieces, and one is really beautiful, and I like it very much. This is the Silver Lake, a kind of a winter tale. And therefore, there is a song of a lottery agent. If you listen to the song today, it's absolutely timely.
And this is a sleazy insurance salesman that's trying to get the money that the person won in the lottery.
Yeah, he won in a lottery, and immediately there is a Finanzberater, a financial advisor who wants to get out of your money as lot as he can, you know.
Der Hauptgewinn, Ihr Scheck, Herr Olim, ich gratuliere. Was zahlen Sie für einen Rat? Wie man sein Geld anlegt mit Nutzen. Hast du Geld, lass es nicht bei dir im Sack. Geh zu den Menschen und seh es aus. Das ist ein Acker, der düngt sich mit Blut. Da wächst etwas, da kommt etwas heraus. Das produziert die Krone des Gewinns. Zins und Zinseszins. Zuerst kommt das und dann kommt nichts danach. Für dich schließt sich des Lebens Bilderbuch. Du schlägst nur pünktlich den Kalender auf und liest Termine und du liest genug. Das kalkuliert die Krone.
This is another social critic piece, but not from Brecht, but with Georg Kaiser. Okay.
That reminds me of sort of a mixture between Berlin 1920s revue meets operetta.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But now it's really time. I have already enough on myself to all the social critic things. When this was already written in 1933. I mean, this was then when Hitler came to power already, and then the time for Kurt Weill, let's say all the personal situation became more and more critical, and he went to Paris. And he needed other commissions to stay alive and to get money.
Also, presumably because the Nazis eventually, if already, turned off the money spigot from his commissions from the older works.
Absolutely, yeah. So he really wasn't really without money. And then in Paris happened something really crazy because first Max Reinhardt connected him. To write the music to Werfel's Eternal Road.
Well, this is the same time that, was it Max Reinhardt who asked Korngold to come over to do the music for Midsummer Scream? And that's the first time Korngold went to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Which was then
the
reason why he was able to escape.
Exactly, yeah. And he called Weill that he should take care of Kurt Werfer's The Eternal Road and ask him to make the music for it. And on the other side, there was Robert Vanbury from Hungary, and he had a genius idea. He wanted to make a kind of dictator operetta. And Wein was so fascinated of this idea, he changed his composition style immediately, and the result was this year, Der Kuhhandel or Shady Deal. Shady dealing, that means that the farmer has to change his cow against a weapon and to fight for the dictator. And this music is like, I have to say, like, better than every Lehar operetta. I say it better than every Lehar fucking already.
I remember now that a couple of weeks ago, or a month, I asked you to play me something by violin I wouldn't know, and you showed me that. I was gonna, and I forgot, was it Iceland or was it Wow? But that's the two islands in the Caribbean or some,
Yeah.
and they're being forced into a war against their will because the weapons have to be sold.
Yeah.
And that's great music. That is
Absolutely great music.
And I remember more so than Lehar, all these other Silver Age operetta people, there's an element of Gilbert and Sullivan in back,
Yep.
I find.
Yeah.
And I love Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah.
And and this I had no idea even existed, even though it's on one of these CDs.
Lieber Gott, was machen wir? Der starke Mann steht vor der Tür.
Diese Hecke dienen uns zu verstecken, damit unsere Recke bestimmt nicht entdecken.
Leise, nur leise, die Maus ist so leise, dass ihr uns nicht hören und unsere Kreise nicht stören. Nur leise, die Maus ist so leise, dass unser Verstecken nicht entdeckt. Was ihr nur will, still, was ihr nur will, still. Nicht versteht, hat nicht Werk, weil du bist dieser Mann nicht so stark. Aus Feld er steht, an der Frost so zerrt. Skoll mit der Stätte, mich flüchtet ein das Vieh. Wie das Vieh gezählt, hat eine Rede gefehlt. Das liegt jetzt irgendwo dort reingestehen, im weißen Schnee. Das liegt ist niemals erklärt. Feuer! Rein! Na? Exzellenz, es ist noch da. Es wird sich sicher so verdrießen. Der Lauf ist ein General. Man kann mit dem Gewehr nicht schießen. Exzellenz, es ist fatal. Exzellenz, es ist fatal. Es ist sicher so verdrießen. Der Lauf ist ein General. Man kann mit dem Gewehr nicht schießen. Man kann mit dem Gewehr nicht schießen. Es ist fatal. Exzellenz, es ist fatal. Exzellenz, es ist fatal. Exzellenz, es ist fatal. Der Lauf ist ein General. Man kann mit dem Gewehr nicht schießen. Exzellenz, es ist fatal.
And talking of topical, that libretto is very topical now.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a certain point of view, obviously. You know, if you're not a fan of the military industrial complex, then you'll love that opera.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's good fun.
Yeah. But as I just talked before, coming back to Paris, this little station between Germany and America. We were talking about Max Reinhardt and the Eternal Road. No? Was really a huge piece from Franz Werfer. So he had on one time compose this operetta, we just heard, and on the other side, working already on the Eternal Road, which of course is a totally different other style.
Yeah, I find him to be more interesting when he is being funny.
Okay.
He's being serious.
This was one of his first biggest success in the United States. Max Reinhardt made the scenery and staging, and they had more than 156 performances there. But not the Propheten. This Propheten is the last part of Eternal Road, but it was never really performed. The first premiere of Propheten was here done by the radio from the Austrian radio, the orchestra from the Austrian radio in 1998. So nearly 50 years after this composition.
Didn't I translate in the break? Yes. Something. I have a recollection vaguely.
Yeah. No, as Kurt Weill had to immigrate then, of course, with his wife Lotte Lenya to the United States. From the Americans, he was also asked to send out some songs for propaganda over the, how you say in English, Kurzwellenradio?
Shortwave radio. Yeah.
The shortwave radio, yeah. And we had a lot of shellacs from that time, and found really here from the Office of War Information in Washington, 1943, Kurt Weill on the piano and his wife Lotte Lenya singing Und was bekam des Soldaten Weib? What is in English and what
did the soldier's wife get?
What did the soldier's wife get, yeah.
Was bekam des Soldaten Weib aus der alten Hauptstadt Prag? Aus Prag bekam sie die Stöckelschuh, einen Gruß und dazu die Stöckelschuh. Das bekam sie aus der Stadt Prag. Und was bekam des Soldaten Weib aus Oslo über dem Sund? Aus Oslo bekam sie das Krieglein aus Feld. Hoffentlich gefällt das Krieglein aus Feld. Das bekam sie aus Oslo am Sund.
Ja, das ist Kurt Weill as a propaganda fearless. But the song, I mean, you cannot translate all. So she.
It was a sardonic little song, but it's the wife of the soldier gets a nice pair of heels from Prague, and then a beautiful fur, I think, from Oslo, and then a nice hat that fits her well from Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And so it goes on, and then eventually from Russia she gets a widow's nail. Yesterday, the dead body of her husband.
But what is a part of how to say, if you had been an immigrant in the United States, then you also had to make a kind of propaganda there,
and presumably you'd want to.
Okay.
Right? I mean, why wouldn't Weill want to do whatever he could in order to have the Nazis defeated?
Yeah.
I'm sure he was glad to do his bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they all tried that, of course, but he was doing it in his free will. If he were caught, I remember P.G. Woodhouse, because some of that music reminds me of the time that he lived in, was captured by the Nazis, and they treated him very nicely because they knew where he was. Yeah. And he transmitted his little stories via shortwave the other way.
Yeah.
Because the Nazis were trying to show the Americans that, look, We have Woodhouse-Jørgen. It's not so bad
Oh,
because
yeah.
they desperately wanted to keep the United States from entering the war.
Yeah.
And Woodhouse did this naively, he wasn't aware of what's going on. And he got really into trouble for it. And I mean, that's essentially the birth of Voice of America.
Ah, okay. And happily, I was already saved and settled in the United States, you know. Because then, of course, comes this huge, and we can make now, I don't know, hundreds of music examples. It becomes now this huge, amazing career on the Broadway. And there are thousands of very good songs. For example, we could do Firebrand of Florence with the BBC Symphony Orchestra. And of course, these Broadway scenes, and those with many people and choruses and so on.
Queen of Sheba, for being seductive, was Helen of Troy to blame for the Trojan horse? No, my friends, 'twas a greater force. And so, by the shades of Pluto, am I to blame for acting like Benvenuto? You have to do what you do. Season up to you at home. We all gave up the voodoo till you hear the trumpet blow. In this life, what else can you do? In this life, we're pawns in a game. If you have to do what you do.
The funny thing, this is a Broadway operetta about Benvenuto Cellini.
Well, yeah, there's a famous opera, of course, by Berlioz.
Yeah. After I listened to that, honestly, I prefer more the funny version than the Berlioz version.
I hope it's Berlioz.
Yeah.
What else do you have to surprise me here?
I'm surprised it's for the finale because we have a new Broadway show coming out now from Opera North. It's called Love Life. And Love Life is from 1948, and Stephen Sondheim denoted it as a useful influence on my own work. I can give you a goodbye now with Love Life. Bitte?
We get a preview, a sneak preview.
A preview, yeah, you get a preview, you know.
Sweet.
Illusions? What's that?
Come on along with me and you'll know I got a rainbow waiting below. If you are all jangled, your lives are tangled, I'll dig you out of your woe. Come on along where living is bright, where there is sunshine, sweetness and light. Where are we going? Don't you know? To the Illusion Minstrel Show. Sunshine, sweetness and light. When you live it easy to ride. When you are all tangled, your shirts are jangled. Can't you say without rise? You want to live, leave me alone. Stick you up under your wall. When I hear a word and when you get this one,
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This was again a very interesting and what already.
It's already over?
It's already over. I mean, we only have 30 minutes, but we could do 10 hours.
So we'll talk about the complete string quartets by Kurt Weill in the next episode.
I only was concentrating on the theater, not this cheap stuff. Ciao.